How to parent and how to educate are two of the biggest topics that I feel torn about most days. Trying to stay in your own lane with so many opinions can leave you asking yourself questions daily about what is right for our neurodivergent kids. Dr Naomi Fisher is a clinical psychologist, author and speaker. Naomi specialises in autism, trauma and alternative education, working with children, teenagers and parents. Naomi lives in Devon with her family and is the author of 6 books, including When the Naughty Step Makes Things Worse, The Teenager's Guide to Burnout and A Different Way to Learn. The thread that ties Naomi's work together is her willingness to take a step outside the conventional and challenge the status quo, even when others disagree. I would highly recommend Naomi's books and webinars that cover all sorts of topics with empathy, support and kindness. In this episode, we talked about why a child refusing to get dressed or clinging more may be showing you how safe they finally feel and not that they're going backwards. Building trust starts when a child knows their no will be heard without judgment, and why children can't learn when they're in survival mode. Welcome to the podcast, Naomi. Naomi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I am just so happy to have you here. And I can't tell you the difference that actually your books have made to my life. Reading them has given me permission to think about things differently. And I think permission that I didn't really feel I had from anywhere else. So I just want to start off by just saying thank you for your words, for your wisdoms, for your workshops, and for all the wonderful things that you do. I do start usually just by asking my guests just to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do within this huge space.
Okay, so I'm Dr Naomi Fisher. I'm a clinical psychologist and author. And a clinical psychologist means that I specialise in behaviour and mental health. And all clinical psychologists specialise in mental health and behaviour, and I particularly specialise in autism and trauma. And I, over the last however many years, probably 25 years I've been a clinical psychologist, I've been on a complicated journey professionally and also personally because I've had my own children who I've educated non-conventionally. And I think those things all acting together, plus my own kind of unusual school experience, led me to really question things. And it's really nice that you say about it giving you permission, because I feel that's really what I want to do. I felt very much when I was a sort of new parent that my children needed me to parent differently. And yet what I saw around me didn't validate that. You know, I felt bad about how I was parenting, and I saw other parents also feeling bad about how they were parenting. And then I was thinking about it as a psychologist, and I was thinking, no, hang on, I'm parenting responsively, I'm listening to my children, I'm doing things in reaction to them, and yet I feel really bad about it. I feel like I should be setting boundaries and having strict rules and having a firm bedtime and all these things which we couldn't quite manage. And so I wanted to get that out there as my children got a bit older, and I realised I'm in this quite powerful position as a clinical psychologist that probably people challenge my parenting less than they might have challenged somebody else's, because they were like, oh, she probably knows what she's doing, even though I was just making it up like everybody else. And so I really felt as my children got older that I really wanted to write about doing things differently so that parents like me could say, oh, we're not the only ones doing this. Maybe we're actually doing something good here. And it's not just about giving permission. I think it's also giving permission to feel good about what you do, because I feel so many parents, if you have a child for whom conventional parenting doesn't work and who isn't behaving in the way that we think of as a well-behaved child, it's so easy to feel really rubbish about your parenting. And yet those are the parents who are absolutely doing the most amazing, exceptional, hard work every day, and yet they feel the most rubbish. So I kind of wanted to provide something that says, you know, I really see that you're doing something different. It's really hard work and you're doing a fabulous job. Keep going.
I'm actually really forward thinking.
I hope so.
You know, because I think, you know, we are stuck in that generational change. And we do have to question ourselves as to, am I doing this because this is right for my child? Or am I doing this because this is what I believe should be the right way?
Absolutely. And it's a sort of constant questioning, isn't it? You're constantly reevaluating yourself, going, why am I doing this? Do I want to be doing this? Should I be doing something different? It's hard work.
It's hard work. The first thing I read when I turned your book, When the Naughty Step Makes Things Worse, is your dedication, which says, to the parents who know that it isn't working and the children who show us another way. And I remember just pausing and just being like, yes, that is exactly what it is. My child is wanting to show me another way, very loudly and very clearly. And I suppose when you are in a position where you've got more than one child and they're presenting differently, you're lucky in the fact that you go, well, hang on a minute, that child is sitting at the table, and one isn't. So you're kind of able to go, well,
probably not me.
Yes. But if you don't have that,
really hard.
Really, really hard. And I guess the premise of this particular book that you've written really dives into low demand parenting. And it was the first time I had really, I'd heard about it or thought about another way. So I just wondered if you could sort of explain about low demand parenting and what the intention is behind it.
Okay, so the idea is really that there are some children for whom the naughty step makes things worse. That when we read about parenting, or if you read conventional books about what parents are meant to do, a lot of it is about how to get children under control. Get them to do the things that you want them to do. If they don't do those things, you put on a bit more pressure. You put them on the naughty step, or you count to 3, or you put them in time out, or you make sure you're very firm and your voice sounds really like you mean business, and all these kind of things. And then there are some children for whom that doesn't just not work, but it actually makes things worse. And the reason is that those are children who are sometimes called demand avoidant children. We call them pressure sensitive children in the book. And those are children for whom that kind of pressure provokes anxiety, and their behaviour is driven by anxiety. So the behaviour that we see as bad behaviour, I wouldn't call it that, but that's what it's often called, or being naughty, is them showing us that they can't cope with the situation. And if then as parents what we do is respond by putting more pressure on, then they show us even more that they can't cope with the situation. And really quickly we get into these horrible cycles with our children where everything we're doing makes things worse. So low demand parenting kind of switches that around. So it says, okay, I'm going to see the child's behaviour as really them holding up their flags. I think about it like semaphore flags saying, help, help, things aren't working for me. I can't cope with this situation. And so
we should also, just at that point, I could just see, we should just say Eliza Fricker illustrates the book. And obviously Eliza Fricker came on and spoke to me about PDA, but I just imagine one of her illustrations
exactly
holding up the flags.
The brilliant thing about working with Eliza is that I do see a lot of the stuff I write in images, and then I say to Eliza, could you do that? And she's like, yes. And then about 10 minutes later, there it is. It's amazing.
Dream team.
Yes, it really is. It's great. So this book is full of Eliza's illustrations. But it's when you see the child's behaviour as a sign of them not managing, or of distress or anxiety, then it no longer makes any sense to try and control that behaviour or try and punish that behaviour, because you're not addressing the root causes of it. You're not addressing why is this child so distressed or not managing. So what you try and do with low demand parenting, you try and bring down that level of arousal for the child. So what it looks like, and what lots of people who don't understand it will look like, is not punishing them for things. People say, oh, you just let them get away with things. You're not letting them get away with things. You're actually looking at what's really going on here. Is what I'm doing helping? And if it's not helping, let's do something else. So I think it's very psychologically informed. I'm a psychologist. And in the book, there's lots of little sort of diagrams saying, think about, why is the child doing this? Whether what you're doing is helping. And the idea of low demand parenting is that we reduce the demands of everyday life. We drop the demands that we can. We try and get alongside our child rather than being someone who's trying to have power over the child. So we said basically you kind of drop the idea that the role of parenting is to control the child. Instead, the role of parenting is to be alongside the child, to try and help them do the things they need to do the things they want to do. And so hopefully they are more able to grow, because and learn, because the problem with being a child when you're in a sort of state of high arousal all the time is you can't learn. It's like you're in survival mode. So imagine if you're a child for whom the way that children are normally treated at school, at home, all of those kind of things, those things send you into a state of high anxiety, then you're going to be living most of your life in a state of high anxiety. And that means that you're not going to be able to learn in the way that other children are, because we know that when you're in that state of high anxiety, you're just looking, how do I stay safe? How do I stay safe? You're not actually able to be curious about the world or ask questions or look out for things. So what we want to do is bring down that level of arousal with low demand parenting so that children can learn.
Some of the changes that I noticed, I would say one of the first changes was I felt for the first time they were able to trust me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I noticed that they were able to say a few things to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it vividly. We were at a wedding and we used a code word if we needed to get out.
Mm-hmm.
They just turned to me and said, I need to move.
Fantastic.
And I remember just thinking, it was those small little moments of, okay, they're starting to trust me because they know I am listening.
Yeah.
But on my other shoulder is this voice of, now I feel like I'm almost so permissive of kind of different challenges. Mm-hmm. Although I knew that this was the road I wanted to take, and I knew what sense it made, I still had that feeling of I don't feel in control of what might happen. And, you get the voices of you need more boundaries, you need to be tougher. And the problem there is that if they don't have the consistency that this is the way we're going to do it, there's mixed messages. And then you become sort of the safe person. Mm-hmm. And with that, you get a lot of the
more challenging behaviour. Absolutely. Yes.
So... yeah, I'm curious just to ask, when there is a moment where actually for their safety or certain scenarios where they need to know what the boundary is.
There's a non-negotiable. What happens then?
Yes.
Well, I think you've talked about something really important with the wedding when you've said, I need to move. The child says, I need to move. And the parent's response, rather than saying, come on, be quiet, be still, it's a wedding, is, okay, how can we make that happen, maybe? Or, or I need to get out of here now. Yeah. Okay, let's go. Yeah. So you basically trust the child and you're building that relationship with them where they know that if you can, you're going to help them with something, you're going to listen. And that is so important. And I often talk to parents who are like, you have to build that awareness with them that you are going to listen to their no. Because a lot of the time we just override children's no's, don't we? They say no, and you're like, come on, just give it a go. And actually that thing of, okay, you say no, I'm going to listen to you. Even if it's really frustrating, even if, you've spent all day trying to get to the park and now you're 10 minutes in and the child's like, I need to go now. And you're like, ugh. And then you're like, okay. It's like every time you're doing that, you're building a block in your relationship with them, where they know that you are listening to them when you can. And it's almost like you're building up credit in the bank so that then when you do get to the actual non-negotiables, like actually this really has to happen, then I think what happens is the child has more capacity to cope with that because they know that probably it's real. Because often parents, there's a lot of time we're saying this has to happen, this has to happen. Actually, a lot of it doesn't have to happen. It's just... because we'd like it to happen. It doesn't have to happen. But with non-negotiables, I think a lot of it is, this is going to be hard, so how can we make it easier for you? So what could we do? So, for example, if getting dressed is really difficult in the mornings and you're like, we really do have to get dressed before we go places, or you really do have to have your shoes on if we're going to go out somewhere, then you'd be thinking, okay, so how can I make this really easy? One thing might be not doing lots of reminders. For a pressure-sensitive child, the kind of, can you put your T-shirt on? Can you put your T-shirt on? Each of those is going to be a bit like they're being poked each time. It's going to make them more anxious. So it might be things like literally just, here's your shirt, leave them, give them a bit of time to do it. It might be not pushing the shoes thing, but just quietly taking them, putting them in the car when you get to the other side. Shoes are there. Yeah. So just... turning down the pressure from all of it.
When I look back now and I think about the amount of times that I stood at our front door trying to leave the house, and now I just pack everything into the car.
Yeah.
And then when they figure out that they need it,
it's there.
They will do it.
Yes, exactly. So it's a lot of forward thinking for parents, and it's quite hard work. And I think the voices, as you say, is so hard, isn't it, to overcome our own conditioning, which says things like, how will they ever learn? Or how are they ever going to do these things for themselves if you're doing it all for them? And I think that betrays a great distrust of children, actually. It's like we believe that we have to force children to do things all the time, or they're never going to grow up and become people who want to do things for themselves. And actually, I think pressure-sensitive children, I think they are fabulous children. The other thing, I just love being around pressure-sensitive children because they're so clear-sighted, they're so good at knowing what they need, and they're so good at telling you what they need often if you listen to them, if you give them the space, and they're so refreshing to be around from that perspective. It's like if I have a child in my therapy room who's pressure sensitive, I absolutely know they want to be with me because I know that they'll say, Naomi, I've had enough now, and we'll end the session when they don't. It's just brilliant. So there's something about embracing those qualities of the children, which I actually think make fabulous teenagers and adults. It's just that a lot of the qualities of pressure-sensitive children are tricky to manage as a parent of a younger child, because we do want our younger children to be under control a lot of the time. But actually being under control, it's something that really, as an adult, it's not that great anymore.
Yeah.
We need the sort of out-the-box thinkers, don't we? We need the people who are ready to stand up and say, hang on a minute, this isn't right, or this shouldn't be working like that. And I think these are the children who are going to be like that. We just 100%. Need to not squash them.
Exactly. Naomi, I think you are a great person to ask, why is it we hear so often, well, this wasn't around in my day. Children just weren't like this in my day. They just
did what they were told.
And sort of the rise of diagnosis and people being diagnosed and this kind of the hype that's in the media and what's your thought on all that?
So I think there are different ways of seeing children at different times in history. And I don't actually think children are hugely different now. Although there's something about this generation having been through COVID, I think there is a bit of a difference in this actual current generation. But generally, I don't think children change. But I think the way that we perceive children and that we think about them change. So, for example, demand avoidance wasn't something anybody talked about before, I think, about the year 2000. It just, I did my PhD in autism before that. Nobody ever mentioned it. Just wasn't a thing. And then somebody described it and started talking about it, and it was like people recognised it in their children. They said, wow, this really explains what we're going through. So the particular thing that's demand avoidance or pressure sensitivity, where children respond to the demands of everyday life with anxiety, and then because of that anxiety, they avoid the demands of everyday life. I think children have probably been doing that for millennia. It's just that they would have been called naughty or bad, or they would have got in trouble. But I also think that we've unfortunately become more rigid in our child rearing, but also more rigid in school. So I think that if you look back 20, 30, 40 years, you'll find that the school system was less rigid and there was a bit more flexibility within it. And you'll often, if I think about my own school experience, or if you talk to people who were teachers 20, 30 years ago, they'll say, oh yeah, there were always the kids who just, didn't join in with things, didn't do the things everybody else did. We used to find other things for them to do. Someone told me that their child spent a lot of time with the caretaker when they were at primary school. Someone said, oh yes, my child used to go and hang out with the dinner ladies and help. There was that kind of flexibility in the system, which kind of acknowledged those differences without acknowledging those differences.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And I think with the rhetoric about improving education, unfortunately, has often meant everything gets more rigid. Everybody's assessed more. There's more tests. We now have lots of tests in primary school, whereas when I was at primary school, no tests at all. So there's much more pressure on everybody to kind of march through development at the same time. Yes.
And earlier
pressure,
on.
Pressure. So if you think about, got children who are sensitive to pressure, we've got more pressure. Not surprising when I see more children with difficulties. And I actually think every time we bring in something like another test, like the screening test at 6 or whatever it is, we kind of create another group of children who don't measure up at that stage and who are identified as having difficulties, which actually weren't identified in that. So when you can argue about whether that's a good thing or not, because schools might say that's a good thing because we're able to give those children extra help. Someone else might say, but actually maybe if we'd just given them another year or two, they might have, it might have been all right. And we will never know because of the way that we're running our school system at the moment. So I think there's lots of factors coming into play, but I don't think it's that these children are somehow different to other children. I just think it's a different way of thinking about them.
You mentioned at the start about your own experiences at school.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience of school and what happened that kind of, made you feel interested in a different way of learning?
So I went to 11 different schools when I was growing up. So my parents moved country. We lived in a couple of different African countries. We lived in the UK. We lived in different places of the UK. So I moved school at least every 2.5 years. Was never any school for more than 2.5 years. And what I learned through that process was how differently different schools do things, although they were all essentially schools still, and how schools tended to have very strong beliefs about how the way they did things was really important, essential, the best way to do things. So when schools in England, school uniform, very important to have your uniform right. And funnily enough, not just important, the teachers would try and make sure your uniform was right. And we had the whole, measuring skirts and that kind of thing. But also other students, you had to wear your uniform right, didn't you? I don't know if you had this. Yeah. You had to, in my school, you could not have the whole of your tie out.
Yeah,
you had to have the big bit tucked in.
And a certain amount of lines done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's amazing amount of policing of school uniform. But the previous school I had been to before I went to school with uniform was an international school. No one had any uniform. No one ever policed clothes. Everybody just kind of wore jeans and that was fine. And it was wow, each school has this set of rules which is becomes a real focus. And yet, what is that to do with learning? Why does it matter if my skirt's a bit longer, a bit shorter, or my ties? It just all seems. So I think really early on at 13 or 14, I was already thinking, there's something a bit strange about this school thing that everybody... And also, I moved school so often. I moved schools to really radically different school systems. So I was in an international school at one point. I went to a Steiner school at one point. Went to a comprehensive school. Went to quite a lot of different schools. And yet it didn't seem to make a huge amount of difference. It wasn't I didn't come into year 10. So I came into year 10 at a British school, having not been through the British school system for the previous however many years. It wasn't like I had a huge gap. And I was maybe a lot of what we think we're learning at school is actually just growing up and doing things. And maybe that's part of what's happening. And so when I actually decided to unschool my own children when they were younger, which meant that we home educated without a curriculum. So I didn't teach them anything. And it was kind of I was almost putting that into practice. It was maybe a lot of what we think people learn at school is actually just the process of growing up and engaging more with the world. And, we all know there's an enormous difference between a 5-year-old and a 16-year-old. Whether they've been to school or not, they are going to be an entirely different person. And we tend to put a lot of that down to school, but maybe it's not.
So did your children start off at school?
No.
So
I kind of saw the writing on the wall quite early on. Mm-hmm. We were going to, that was my plan. They had a place, my son had a place at the school down the road. And then we decided that wasn't going to be the right thing for him and that we would home educate. So we home educated from the beginning. And then I've got a daughter who's 3 years younger and she never went to school either.
And did you find yourself up against sort of stigma, comments?
Massively. Everybody... I think because we also had a place at the primary school down the road, which was meant to be a really good primary school, was on our road. So, and everybody we knew was going there. So there was this kind of feeling of we're really stepping off this conveyor belt or almost stepping outside mainstream society. It felt a bit like that. And it was difficult. It was really difficult. It wasn't an easy decision. And I definitely worried maybe I'm ruining their lives. Maybe I'm doing, what about if it really is important that they have to do reception so they can do year 1 and then they can do year 2? Turned out not to be the case. But yes, it was never easy. And I think when you look at these things in retrospect, again, maybe this is one of the reasons I write my books, actually. With retrospect, I can look back now and think, yes, that was the right thing. I'm really glad we made that decision. But it did not feel like that at the time. At the time, it was this is maybe a really irresponsible decision. Maybe it's, and people do say things to you. They say, though, don't you worry about GCSEs. Yeah. That's what everybody says when they're 4.
When they're 4, yeah.
Yeah.
Or socialising.
Oh yes, socialisation. Absolutely. Don't you worry about socialisation.
And how did I think
yes. about that, or how did I answer that? Well, I think thinking about it, I thought, well, my own experiences of socialisation at school were mostly not terribly positive for a start. And I think what I thought was there are all sorts of kinds of socialisation that go on at school, some of which can be really good and some of which aren't. For my children at that time, I thought that their social experiences were likely not to be hugely positive. So actually, I thought skipping that might be quite a good thing. And I felt, my whole attitude to school was very much when they were younger, we could go into it later if we thought it was the right thing. But I don't want us to feel that that it's just the default. It should be a positive thing in their lives. It should be, I'm doing this because I think it's a really good thing for them, not just because that's what everybody does. Everybody goes to school, so we'll just go to school.
And I think the challenge for parents is that really, actually, we're not given an option of another way.
No, not at all.
And so for some families who financially are in a position where it's difficult to have their children at home, or their children will just not cooperate with them, and then you've got to look into how your week is going to be structured and how that's all going to happen. There isn't actually sort of a model that's presented to you to give you another way.
No.
So you then find yourself on this sort of treadmill of trying to find the right schools, trying to find the right settings, and whilst also managing, I think, acute anxiety.
Absolutely.
And that is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I also find it hard to know or understand, which I'm sure you can explain to me, but understanding kind of what comes first. Mm-hmm. Where is the anxiety sitting for neurodivergent children?
Mm-hmm. Anyway,
the impact that school has, and how we can kind of differentiate the two. Because as somebody who has, and I've talked about this many times about my own anxiety, for me, the only way that I've ever really been able to get through my anxiety is by going through these difficult things.
Yeah.
And so there is that slight voice where you go, and actually you talk about this in A Different Way to Learn, about how there is an appropriate place for challenging your anxiety.
Yes.
However, school might not be that place.
So what you're talking about is when people often say, if you've got a child who's really anxious about school, for example, people will often say, well, you have to make them go, won't they, in order to overcome their anxiety. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I actually thought a lot about this because when I first started hearing people say this, I was like, well, I can see where that makes sense, because that, as you say, that is something that we know helps overcome your anxiety. Like if you are really anxious about dogs, then spending time with dogs is pretty well the only way that we know that you will probably get less anxious about dogs over time. You might not, but hopefully you will if you meet the right dogs. So the thing with school is people say, well, surely if you spend more time at school, you'll be less anxious about it. And I think that misunderstands the different kinds of anxiety, because there's irrational anxiety. So there's when you might be anxious about dogs, perhaps because you've had a bad experience with a dog, or a dog barked in your face when you were small, or whatever it is. But actually, most dogs are not frightening. Most dogs don't bite you. Most dogs don't bark at you. In general, we can coexist quite okay without dogs doing something threatening, but some people feel under threat from them anyway. That's entirely different to something like school, where you might be really, really unhappy at school. And a part of my school experiences as well was that I was actually very, very unhappy at two schools and refused to go to two of my schools, one when I was 5 and another when I was 13 or 14. So I remember what that was like. And I remember just feeling like an alien at school, just absolutely hating it, feeling like this is just not the right place for me. I kind of felt, I'm always someone who feels my stress in my body. So I had like these sort of prickles all the way through my body whenever I went to school. And particularly when I was older, my glands swelled up. I had like physical symptoms of it. And when I look back at that now, I think if they had said to me, well, you're anxious about school, you need to overcome that anxiety by continuing to go, that would have completely missed the point that there was something going on at that school which made me feel that way. Do you see what I mean? So there's a real difference between an irrational anxiety about something, which we all have, or an anxiety about something because it's new. We all have anxiety about novel things. And then an anxiety about something because actually you're going into something which you don't want to be, which you really don't like and which doesn't feel good for you. And the analogy I sometimes use is roller coasters, because I hate roller coasters. My children love them. I really hate them. And I hate them because they make me sick. Really quickly, I'm sick on roller coasters. And when my children were younger, I had to go on roller coasters because you have to, if they're below a certain height, they have to have someone sitting next to you. Anyway, and they used to love going, and I would go and I'd go on these roller coasters. And it would just be horrible. And I started to feel quite anxious about roller coasters. And I thought, it wouldn't make me feel less anxious about roller coasters if someone said to you, right, got to overcome your anxiety about roller coasters. You're going on that roller coaster twice a day, every day. Because the reason I feel anxious about roller coasters is because I'm sick on roller coasters. There's nothing irrational there. The only thing that would make me more anxious about it is being forced to do it. Yeah. And actually, my anxiety about roller coasters now is no greater than I haven't been on a roller coaster now for my children are big enough, so I don't have to go on them anymore. I haven't been on a roller coaster for about 8 years. I'll be completely happy if I never go on one for the rest of my life. But I'm not more anxious about it now than I was 8 years ago. Because that isn't why I'm not anxious about roller coasters through an irrational anxiety. It's just because they make me sick.
And I think that makes total sense. Also, what's difficult is that if your child can't articulate what it is,
which most children can't,
you're then trying to understand what it is. I think that's really hard because you're trying desperately to, I think as parents, don't we want to fix, we want to make it better, and when you don't know really exactly what the cause is,
it's hard to know.
It's
and
hard
we
to
might
know.
not. We might not. I mean, we can't understand everything for our children. They can't often tell us about it. But I think that often parents, I think, are generally really well tuned into their children and what they find difficult, particularly if you've got a child who has different needs to other children, because you've had to learn about their needs. You can't just read the book and say, oh, that's how children work, because your child doesn't work that way. You need to learn it. So you've got this really good intuitive understanding of them, but often parents feel bad about that, or they feel that intuitive understanding isn't real because they're told by other people things like, oh, you're being over anxious, or, just being overprotective, or all this sort of thing. So what I say to parents is, if your child can't tell you about what is worrying at school, for example, just let yourself spend a bit of time thinking about what you really know about your child and how you know they respond to different situations, and then think through the school day. Because, for example, I don't know if this applies to you, but lots of parents, if I say to them something like, what would it be like if you took your child to a crowded shopping centre on a Saturday morning? And they're like, no way, that would just be awful. They know that immediately, that their child would not be able to cope with that. And if you think through the whole school day, so, we start off with the playground, busy, then we do this, then we have these transitions, and just using what you know of your child. Is that okay? Is that going to be okay for them? And just allow yourself to think it through. Because I think often with neurodivergent children, it's usually a kind of accumulation of things that they're having to cope with all through the day without enough co-regulation from an adult. Because I think one of the things that I think goes across many, many different forms of neurodiversity is that children need longer to help them manage their emotions. So small children, adults help them manage their emotions. What's what we rock our babies, we soothe them, we feed them, we do all of these stuff to help them calm their emotions down. And then they're toddlers, their emotions are all over the place, and we're still having to help them calm down because they can't do it. They have huge screaming fits because they cannot calm themselves down. And then as they get older, when they go to school, there's an expectation by society at this point that they are more able to manage that for themselves, that they are now sort of taking it in-house almost. They're managing their own emotions. They don't need somebody there helping them all the time. But some children do need someone there still helping them all the time. And they can't get that at school. The numbers aren't, the ratios aren't good enough. And also teachers are there to teach. Teachers sometimes say this to me, I'm there to teach, I want to teach. And it's like, well, you've got a whole class of 30 little nervous systems, lots of whom actually need a lot of calming and regulation. It's an impossible task for teachers. I can't see how you can do it in that kind of ratio. But that's what parents are doing. And I'll bet you that's what you're doing a lot of the time with your children. You are helping them manage their emotions. Like when your child says to you, I need to move at the wedding, that's about emotion regulation. That's them saying, what, in order to keep calm right now, in order to keep okay in this wedding, I need to go and move my body a bit, which is amazing self-awareness, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think there must be a process. So say you are in that situation and your child is struggling to get to school.
Mm-hmm.
When you, and from reading your book, when or if you do make that decision that they need to come out, there can be a regression and sort of heightened separation anxiety. There can be a need for recovery, and there is a process. And I think in that period, you can then think they need to get back.
Mm-hmm. You mean you want to...
Because they're regressing.
Yes, it makes you panic. It makes you panic.
You think that, from... they're even more used to you. They're never going to be okay without me.
Yes. Yeah, you panic. And it's the taking off clothes. I don't know if this is something I hear from a lot of parents, that their child comes out of school and, they've been just about managing to get them to school each day, and suddenly the child won't put on any clothes at all. And they go, oh my goodness, what have I done? I had this child who was getting out each day, and now I have this child who can't tolerate clothes at all. And it's actually really common. I've heard it from so many parents now. And I think it's a few things going on. I think often when children come out of school, they've been holding things in for a long time. It's like adults as well, when we've been sort of holding things in, managing just to get through things, and then we stop. That's often when we feel it, isn't it? It's like, oh my goodness, now I feel the impact of everything that's been going on. And I think that's what we see for our children. But I also think that there's a point of which they're not really sure what's going to happen next. They're not really sure whether you might say, that's it, back to school. And so they are kind of showing you that isn't going to happen. And one of the ways they show you is by taking off all their clothes, because there's nothing like a naked child to make life difficult in terms of getting out the house or doing anything. So it's a really full body way of communicating, this is not going to happen. You're not going to take me back. But also the clinging to you, separation anxiety is part of that as well, because I think separation anxiety is almost one of these big baskets in which loads of things get thrown. And really what it means, separation anxiety specifically means something about very, sort of 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, when babies realise that they need to be next to their parent. But with older children, I think it's often just I feel most safe with you right now. And I think with children in school don't have very much power. Children out of school have more power, but that power is usually sort of reflected from their parents. So if their parents share that power with them, then they have some power. So, for example, parents give children the ability to leave somewhere, which you don't have at school. So it's understandable that a child who's come out of that situation of perhaps having felt quite powerless is going to be like, right, I'm going to stick with you because I know that you'll get me out of a difficult situation if I need you to.
Do you think there would have been any school setting, or if you could design a school that would have made you feel more comfortable with your children?
With my children?
Yes.
So my children actually do go to school now. So they go to a democratic school. They go to a democratic school in Devon called Sands, which is a secondary school. And the thing that made me feel comfortable with Sands, and that actually with any other educational establishment my children have been in, is that they are not forced to do things. So at Sands there are lessons, but they can choose to go or not go, which sounds really radical. And, in some ways I think it is actually, just because, of course, it changes the relationship between the children and the teachers. If the teachers know children are here because they want to be here, and if they don't want to be here, they won't come. And that is just so different if you think about a mainstream school where it would be children have to be here. There is no question about that. And there is essentially no feedback system for the children, because I think the children at Sands are basically giving feedback with their feet. If they want to. But it's not, people don't take it personally, like the teachers don't take it personally. The children will be like, I don't want to do music, so I'm not going to go to music. But they can, it's there, so they can come back to it at another stage. But I think essentially the kind of schools that I think we need essentially carry on the principles of the best early years education upwards. So in early years, at a good early years setting, a really good nursery, there's lots of things that children like to do, which, water play, sand play, home corner, all that kind of thing. interested and available adults, and the children can choose what they do, and they can choose when they do it, and they can choose when they move from thing to thing, and they learn. They learn loads in nursery, and they learn loads about themselves as well, because they learn, just like you're talking about with your child, they learn, oh, you know, I like doing this for a bit, and then I like doing that for a bit, and then maybe I like doing a bit of reading to calm myself down, then I like to go and run around the playground. They're learning how to regulate themselves. And I don't see any reason why we can't actually carry on those principles upwards.
Yeah, because that stops at year 1.
It stops really quickly.
Yeah.
It's almost, and they're pushing it down, so it's almost stopping in reception. You know, there's more groups, you know, phonics groups, maths groups in reception, which are compulsory. So I think we're going the wrong way. We're pushing school down when we should be pushing early years up.
Naomi, I could just talk to you all day, but there was a webinar I watched.
Oh, yeah.
And I was that you took, and it was around Christmas time. And you did a beautiful visualization, and you wanted to put the parent and the child to visualize a somewhere like a picture of them doing something. And I remember I did this really clearly, and I had myself on the swing next to my child. Yeah. And with a mantra. And I was thinking about this when I knew you were coming on, because I wanted to share with you how helpful it had been. So basically, when I was in a challenging situation at Christmas, and I was having to sort of manage expectation and trying to sort of stay in my lane with how I wanted things to happen. I mean, Christmas is a whole other episode. It is a huge subject. It is a whole webinar.
It's a whole set of expectations. Yeah.
But it was really, really beautiful. Can you remember what I'm talking about?
So one of the things that happens when we're in a really stressful situation with our children is that we often get really caught up with our thoughts. We're like self-criticism, other people criticising us, lots of words. And actually one of the best ways we know to get out of that as psychologists is to bring yourself to images instead. And I know some people find it hard to bring up images, but there are other ways of doing it. You could think of smells, but basically if you think of something, an image where you feel capable, where you feel, I've got this, I can do this. And it's good if it has movement in it. So the one I use most often for myself is juggling, and I can't juggle. I am hopeless at juggling. I don't have three-dimensional vision, and I spent a long time as a teenager trying to learn how to juggle, couldn't do it. Doesn't matter, because in my mind I can juggle like a pro, and I imagine myself juggling, and I imagine my hands moving and the balls falling in my hands, and I say to myself, I've got this, I can do this. And at the times that are the most challenging with my children, or with, actually it's often with other people, you take a deep breath, you just breathe out, and you bring yourself to this imagery of, I've got this, I can do this. And you just imagine it. And you just imagine the movement. And you just centre yourself on that image and just kind of push the other stuff to the side.
It's very powerful and very helpful. The last thing I ask my guests is if there is one thing you would love to see change for our neurodivergent kids in the future, what would it be?
Oh, that's a very big question. Yeah. I would like an education system which started off with the premise, everybody is different. How can we have an education system that means that all of those differences are accepted and every child comes through it thinking about themselves as a capable and worthwhile person who can learn?
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk Neurodivergent Kids. Don't forget to check out Dr Naomi Fisher's books, and you can find out more about her by going to naomifisher.co.uk. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review and share it with anyone who might find it helpful. I'd also love to hear from you. You can get in touch via email. That's hello@letstalkndkids.com, or message me on @letstalkndkids on Instagram. Thanks so much for listening, and please do join me next time on Let's Talk Neurodivergent Kids.